What's going on? It's Restaurant Expert Roundup. I am here with the author of this book, and she is definitely the cure. And you'll find out why I say that. She's the cure to your hiring woes. Be back in a minute. You know, Tatiyana, there's those once-in-a-lifetime intros you can make where I can say you're the cure, and literally you are. You're Tatiyana Cure, the author of this book, Hire to Win. Tell the audience who you are and about the book.
Sure. Yeah. I planned it out. I planned it out with my last name here. But yeah, no, so I have a background in talent acquisition. I've been both an external recruiter, headhunter. I've been an internal recruiter and head of talent acquisition for several companies, including restaurants, but not solely restaurants. And I wrote this book during the pandemic. So here we are.
Well, I love it. Hiring to Win. And I'll never forget, I'll tell you a funny story and you'll get a kick out of this. So I'm 46 now, but when I was in my early 20s to my early 30s, me and my dad and brother built a boat dealership from scratch up to 44 employees was our peak. And at around 35, we hired a guy named John Kiefer to come in, who is a management consultant. And he came in because we were having just all sorts of internal issues. It was more communication, personality conflicts. So he comes in and he gives us this quiz. I guess not even a quiz, like a survey, a personality test maybe. And he said, hey, I want you to give this to everybody in the company. And it's based on the management. And so all these results came back on all the different managers and he charted them. We had a meeting at my house, had a projection screen up on the wall. And he had this chart that I think was like aggressive, amiable. There were all these little things. And we had myself, we had like 7 managers, myself, service manager, sales manager, accounting manager, bookkeeper, all these people. Mm-hmm. And he goes, Matt, I got one question. And he asked the room also, he's like, who hired all of you? And they all looked at me. And I said, why? And he goes, I've never seen a management team where everybody is in the aggressive quadrant. Like your bookkeeper, who's got an accounting degree, her personality test came back from her and everybody else as aggressive. And he's like, I already found the problem within these surveys is that you hired a bunch of people that are like you, and people, you can't have a bunch of, 10 of you running around being the managers because you're all damn right all the time. So there is definitely an art to hiring, and I do not possess it.
Well, this was several years back, as you said. So I think maybe over time you have developed the art of hiring, right?
Yeah. So what possessed you to write the book? What are some of I've got a couple things in here I've noted I want to ask you about. What are some of the high points for you? What got you to do it? Was it the pandemic? Was you had time during the pandemic, or was this something you were working on for a long time?
A little bit of both. I will say, I think, very early in me, like going to school, like middle school, high school, right? Like I've always been kind of very much of a literary nerd, love to read and so forth. So one of my goals I've always had was to publish a book. And I didn't know what it was going to be about, right? Like, what do you know when you're in school? But I always thought that, one day I will publish a book. And then, fast forward, a couple of years ago, right? I had started to write a book, and I will say, my husband and I were traveling, and I was like, oh, this is perfect. All of my time during like airplane travel, I'll just write a book. So while we were traveling, I spent about 40 hours writing the book. And when I came back, my husband said, you have a computer virus. So I lost all of that.
No.
Lost all of that. I had a mourning period and so forth. And then, I think during the pandemic, right, I think on the day that everyone went remote, I was like, you know what? This is the time. This is the time. I'm not going to be commuting 2 hours a day to my office. So how am I going to spend this time, right? And silly me, like never being an author, I'm like, this is going to be like a 6-month thing. I'm going to publish a book in 6 months. The pandemic will be over in 6 months. And of course, it did take me much longer than 6 months, but it worked out because the pandemic was much longer.
Yep.
And yeah, honestly, I just said, where is my time most spent whenever, I'm kind of coaching managers, and look, like, the first thing, like, and I think the book kind of opens with that, right? Like this analogy of, like, if you think about your building as a home, the first thing that you have an impact on is who you let into your home, right? Like once they're there, they're there until they get kicked out one way or another, right? So this is one area where I spend a lot of time really coaching managers of, like, I know this is, usually when a role opens is because it's like the most inopportune time, right? Like either someone left or like the work piled up, you like really don't have time to invest into hiring. And yet this is the one time where you actually can make an impact. So that's where I decided to spend my time of writing this book on this topic specifically.
And there's definitely an art to interviewing and an art to reading resumes and to understand it. And I think, our company, America's Best Restaurants, works mainly with, owners, operators that have one or two restaurants. And, some of the positions they have, there's not, if you're washing dishes, if you're a hostess, there's certain skill sets you don't have to have. But if you're hiring a manager or you're looking at somebody to maybe possibly be a manager, you definitely have to look at it. And there's got to be a skill in like reading the resume. Like one of the stories I remember back in my day was I went through a course that was talking about, I realized I was terrible at hiring people. Number one, we put a thing in place that they had to pass the culture meter for me. And then I passed them off to 3 other people and they handled the interviewing. And then at that point we got together and we made some decisions. But one thing I went through a course was talked about some of the ways to spot differences. And so like, I'm looking at this resume and this lady applied and she was a friend of my mom's friend. And I look at her resume and literally, I'm not even making it up, for 14 years, like clockwork, every 2 years in March, she got a different job. And I'm looking like it, and you're looking at the resume and it's like every one. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. It was like 2004. I remember. I was like, in March 2006, where are you going to go work?
Yeah.
Excuse me? I said, well, it's March 2004 right now. And according to your resume, every 2 years in March, you get a new job. Mm-hmm. And one thing they also talked about spotting was looking at the resume and are they sideways? Are they lateral moves? Because then it's that person that maybe culture is an issue or attitude or mindset. The grass is greener. And literally her job was identical every time. And she's like, wow, I've never noticed that. She's like, I don't know how to even fix that. I'm like, well, maybe stay in a job for 2.5 years. I don't know. But to me, I was in my early 30s when I saw that. And I remember thinking like, what are the odds of that? And it's just weird how I'm sure is when you're looking at resumes, I know it was what chapter would I have on there? Chapter 5, where it was talking about becoming a talent spotter. And it talked about, looking at the resumes and all the different aspects there. Talk about resumes and, how to digest them, I guess.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, look, so first of all, like kudos to you to like ask such a good question to her for that, where it kind of made her think like, I never thought about it that way. Like, one of the questions I always ask, well, tell me about the best job that you've ever had. Right. Like what made it so good? Like, let's make sure that this is kind of aligned to the best job that you've ever had. Right.
Yeah.
But in terms of resumes, look, like, I think, again, usually when the hiring manager is hiring is when we have such lack of time, right? So usually managers are looking at resumes like while they're multitasking or like on another call or something like that. And here you are, you get, hundreds and hundreds of applicants. So how do you choose who to interview, right? And so, again, like kudos to you for recognizing like maybe there's something there every 2 years. Like, maybe if it wasn't a friend of a friend of a friend, like maybe I wouldn't, maybe when I look at my time, maybe I wouldn't have interviewed her. But you did anyhow. And I think that, look, like the if you get anything out of what I will say in the next couple of minutes is if the more you interview, the more you'll get information, right? So sometimes you'll be surprised by a candidate, and all of a sudden, this person is jumpy and like all over. Every couple of months they switch jobs, and then you meet them and they're like, this is the job, this is the candidate, right? So the more you interview, the more you'll potentially potentially be surprised. You learn more about the industry, you'll build a network. The more you have a positive experience and a conversation between yourself and the candidate, the more they'll probably introduce you to other candidates as well. So if you have the time, then, by all means, go ahead and interview all of these candidates. But what I have found is like kind of like the 10 to 12 candidates mark is where kind of our attention span kind of stops. Like beyond 12, if you have like 30 minutes per interview, you're already looking at 6 hours, right? So beyond that, you're like, I can't do it, right? So now you have to start kind of deciding, well, what's more important to me, right? Like, is it someone who has that role player, plug and play? Like, I'm hiring for a hostess. This person has been a hostess. I'm going to hire him or her to be a hostess in my restaurant, right? But if you look at that, right, and I talk about a role player, well, there's other challenges that come along with that, right? A lot of times, why are they leaving? Well, they're probably looking for a challenge. So if they're making a lateral move, there's probably not going to be a huge challenge there for them. Yeah. So how are you going to start thinking about, well, how am I going to challenge them? How am I going to think about their career growth? How am I going to start thinking about, how to continue to engage them? Now, if you have someone who's like a stretch, right? Like maybe they've never been in a restaurant industry before and they're now looking to get in the industry. So now as a manager, you have to think about, well, it's not a plug and play. I have to spend the time up front, but the likelihood is that they will, if you invest in them, they'll invest back in you and they'll stay in the organization for sometimes longer than that role player, which on paper seems to be very much of a, let me, this makes the most sense. Let me move forward with them. Right. And then there's those candidates that actually I've seen the most now in terms of applicants is that those head scratchers, right? You're kind of, maybe they did a career transition. Maybe they took a step back to take care of like their, whatever family member that they have. And you're thinking like, oh my gosh, they seem to be overqualified. It's a head scratcher. Like, I'm not sure if it's making sense. And all of a sudden you meet them and you're like, oh my gosh, they have all these hidden talents that this is going to be a great fit for me for, they're going to be a culture carrier. They're going to be, they're going to create some sort of standards for me that I've never had, whatever the case may be. Right. So the more you actually give people a chance, the more likely that you're actually going to be surprised. But you do have to start kind of selecting, well, if I'm going to only interview 12 people, maybe I'm going to have a third of that is going to be, those role players. A third of that is going to be, those stretch candidates. And then a third would be, those head scratchers.
Yeah. And you gave me 3 things. One point I want to point out that is a huge misconception that people believe exists. Multitasking doesn't exist. And I used to be a person that have 40 tabs open, 3 computer screens. I got my cell phone. I got this, I got that. It just, it fragments your attention. And I was explaining this to a friend the other day. I said, I want you to take a piece of paper and draw a line across it. I said, so imagine that line is your attention span for 1 hour. And you know that this project's going to take you 1 hour and you need 1 hour of uninterrupted, deep thinking. Every time you check your phone, every time you look at a different screen, every time you talk to somebody, you just fragment and you make worse decisions. And so I can see that. Like me, I had 50, I think I'm up to 54, 55 applications now the last 2 weeks for one job I posted. And a lot of that comes from the culture that we present online and the employees that share it. People want to be near stuff they like. But when I look at this, I don't actually do a normal form. I have a form that asks 3 questions: your favorite color, what attracts you to the hospitality industry, tell me something exciting about you. And then from there, I respond personally to every single application and I ask specific questions and I try and find out. My goal is to disqualify people, maybe it's wrong, based on them just not having the culture. And like my job posting, some people will cringe at this. I had a D's nuts joke in my job posting, and my CFO was like, dude, are you on drugs? And I'm like, if they can't handle what's going to happen in these 4 walls, I want to find out. I want them to read the post and go, this guy's a moron, and be like, good. And so there's little things like that. But you also said something in there that also my man Loisant said. And by the way, this is Loisant. He's got a restaurant in New York called Near's Tavern. This October is their 194th year in business.
Nice.
Which is crazy. I was just up there last week filming with the History Channel. Stopped by, had a burger, and he made a great point here. And you mentioned this earlier. Yeah, you're hiring people. You're trying to retain them. because it's a long, tedious process to get applications, to get resumes, to interview people. And then you have them there for a week and you're back to it. I mean, the cost of your time and money to get to that point, but retention is huge, right?
Absolutely. Like, look, if you, that's the cost of hiring the wrong person, right? Like you're spending all this time of investing, of hiring them, bringing them on, introducing them to your team, training them, and a week later you have to do it all over again.
Yep.
Right? So there could have been some red flags that you could have, pointed out and avoided yourself the hassle.
Yep. One thing you said also, which I really can appreciate, because we just hired one of these young ladies, was you said that they don't look like they fit. Well, I got an application about a month ago, and on paper, I look at it, I'm like, same thing. Like, oh, this is weird. Like, there's some gaps or some weird things here, but I gave it a shot. I had a conversation. Well, it turns out that she has a copywriting history in the back, from a while ago. But the reason she had that gap was she decided to be a mom, and she wanted to she was working in the cafeteria at the school like the last 6 or 8 years, so that she could be at school with her kids and be around them in the morning, which I can appreciate, because that's one of the things I love about being an entrepreneur. And now I have an 18 and 20-year-old, but I used to love every morning, take them to the bus, every afternoon, coming home, having them run up to me. Now they just ask for money. But if I would have looked at that maybe in the younger days, my 20s or 30s, I would have been like, oh, what is this? This lady's a lunch lady. Why would she want to work here or this? And then it turns out she's a badass copywriter and just a beast. And I'm like, thank God the older Matt looked at it. But you're saying, like you said there, like, doesn't fit, but go deeper.
Yeah, I mean, like those head scratchers will surprise you. A lot of times, that they'll carry some talent in there that's not visible, and it's hard, right? Like when you're an entrepreneur and you're hiring and you're so strapped for time, you're like, I don't have this time to spare. But if you make that commitment to meet like at least 1 or 2 head scratchers, I guarantee it won't be time wasted somehow, some way. Like for me, I interviewed a head scratcher, and I didn't end up moving forward with that individual, but they became a vendor of mine, and we do a lot of business together. And you just never know how that will pan out.
Oh, I always tell people, I actually made a tweet yesterday, I think even a Facebook post today, because I do these tweets, and the only reason I do the tweets is to remind myself to do a video. And I said the 4 reasons you should talk to every advertising marketing person that calls your restaurant. And the 4th one was they're a potential customer.
That's right.
And like, I remember back when I was selling radio back in like 2001, I went to a Porsche dealer with the title for my Mazda 626 in my pocket, a checkbook, and I was buying a Porsche. And I'm in the office with a guy, and to him, I was just an advertising salesperson at that point. But I was there as a customer as well, and he didn't know that because he hadn't gotten that far in the conversation. And a lady walks in the office. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael. I didn't mean to interrupt. He goes, oh, no. This guy's a nobody salesperson. Don't worry about it. Come on in. And I'm like, okay, well, this nobody is not buying a Porsche here, and I never did buy a Porsche there. And so it's the same way when you're interviewing these people. They're all potential vendors, potential referral sources, potential customers, and that's a key element. So on page 140, this caught my attention because it hit me today. I had an interview with a guy today. And I would say 9 out of 10 of the people that I interview, when I extend an offer to them, they take the job. We have a really attractive offer. We have a really great company, and they're here for a reason. Well, this guy didn't. And I remember when he was leaving, I was thinking he should leave with something that lays out our benefits. We have 9 weeks of vacation a year.
Wow.
And here you said make the offer sticky. And one thing you talked about was, they've got a spouse they got to have to talk to. And, I remember one time, having somebody say, hey, can you email me the details on health insurance? My wife wants to see it. And this guy literally left here today. And I'm like, man, Matt, why don't I have a piece of paper that has all these badass things about our company down? Because I want to make it to where it's a little stickier, where it's a little more impactful, so that he goes home and he has that conversation with his significant other and he digests it, has all the facts, versus like, I think he said this.
Yeah. And I got to tell you, the landscape has changed. It used to be where the candidates go after, a higher and higher salary or in the bigger title. But that's no longer the case. That's not the only aspect that they're looking for. In fact, I've seen in my work, I've seen candidates who would prefer to take a lesser salary for some sort of other benefit, whether it be flexibility to work from home, whether it be for like 100% medical insurance covered, or whatever the case may be, right? Like, so it's not as easy as like, okay, comparing apples to apples, I'm making this is the offer, it's yes or no. Now it's like, well, now you have to really create like a decision matrix of like, what's most important to you and to your family, right? Like, you might be, if you're making an individual decision, you may say like, well, salary is the most important to me, but right, your spouse may say, well, actually, no, something else is more important.
Yeah. Yeah. I literally have, from reading that, it gave me an idea. I'm going to create a flyer, but I'm on the flyer going to have a QR code that goes to a page on our website that says, hey, if you're looking at this, you've talked to us about a job, here's our benefits, here's the explanation. Because we have a couple unique ones. We have 9 weeks, we're 5 weeks. Like the guy asked this morning, like, hey, I see we have a mandatory week off. My team does on this week. What does that mean? I'm like, it means you have to take off and you're paid. Like, you can't work. Go chill, go do something. And that's unusual. They're not accustomed to seeing that. And then the other, we have a vacation policy where we give $1,000 vacation credit, where if you take a trip in the United States, because we're American restaurants, and you agree to visit a certain number of restaurants that's paid for by the company and fill out a survey there based on their ideal restaurants for our company, for our sales team, that your $1,000 credit to that vacation is paid by us. And so I realized as I'm saying this out loud that some of these things aren't normal. And so it'd be hard to explain to a spouse that it might be pretty cool to have a page and QR code and, hey, here's a video from the CEO, here's the perks. And that would make it a lot easier conversation at home.
Yeah, right. And think about it, like all this, you're extending them an offer with a dollar amount. Let's say it's $50,000, right? And then you have all these perks, and then the total is like $100,000, right? Based on the, all the other perks. Like, that's a different conversation, right? So yeah, for sure, that's a great idea.
Well, I appreciate your time. We're definitely gonna have you on another episode to go deeper in some of these topics. The book is Hire to Win. You can go to the website howtowintalent.com, and there's a link at the top to find the book on Amazon. And I will encourage you, number one, buy the book. Number two, read the book. And third, and most important, leave a review on Amazon to tell other people how awesome the book is, because number one, it gives positive reinforcement back to the authors. I've written 3 books. Tatiyana's written the book. It's tough to write a book, and we want to know that, hey, we did this and you love it, but also it helps the algorithm so that Amazon says, hey, other people looking for how to hire great talent need to buy this book.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thank you for having me. Thanks for promoting my book as well. You did a great job.
Who is the ideal person to go to your website and work with you? Who are you looking for? Who's your best conversation with?
Yeah, I mean, the best conversations are, look, like I'll try to help anyone, but I think that the best conversations is when a manager has realized, they've been crossing their fingers, hoping that things will work out in their hiring, and it hasn't worked out, and they're like ready to make a change. So it's typically, it's not your first hire. It's probably maybe your 10th or 20th hire. And now you're saying, you know what, like, I've realized I could do things better. I've realized now that we're going to scale and continue to grow, I need to make some changes. So those are the ideal people that I'd love to spend my time with.
Okay, awesome. Well, I appreciate your time, and I look forward to digging more into this and hopefully having some deeper conversations on certain topics as we get to know each other.
Thank you so much, Matt. Thanks for having me.
Thank you.